Okay, good evening. We are here for this new session about Science Diplomacy Week in Padua. This afternoon is dedicated to our PRIN, the previous PRIN 2017, dedicated to the role of Italy in science diplomacy since 1966. And we have two first intervention by Marilena Gala from the University of Rome 3 on SDI, Italy, Europe, and the US technological leadership. Federico Paolini, the University of Macerata, scientist and environment, notes for a study in historical perspective. We will make a break and then we have a special session on the methodology because we have a witness of space, Fabio Favata from Imperial College, London, and the postdoc in Padua, Olga Dubrovina, about space science as a tool to build a bridge across political divide. This is a sort of methodological panel because Olga Dubrovina discover and interview Mr. Favata for his research, and particularly for his last book in English about Soviet Russia, space cooperation in Europe in 1980s. And now we start. I give the floor to Marilena Gala from the University of Rome 3.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, David, for your introduction. As Professor Burigana was saying, I will talk about the case of SDI. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the SDI issue. This is a program launched by Ronald Reagan in 1983 with a televised speech he gave. He was talking actually on the military US budget. And within this, announcement about the way resources were to be allocated for the future military buildup of the United States, he was also presenting this idea of SDI. So in a little while, we'll see what SDI would be for. But what I'd like to emphasize, first of all, is part of the speech he was giving, in which he called upon the scientific community, so a whole range of different experts and scientists, to turn their great talents now for the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. So it's interesting that while the US president was presenting to the US public opinion the case of military buildup, he was also saying to his own citizens, you know, this is the time for investing in a set of technologies and scientific research that will be able to rid us of nuclear weapons. So for me, this is a case extremely interesting for diplomacy and for scientific and techno diplomacy, just because it's a sort of crossroad of diplomatic efforts during the Cold War, so involving the two superpowers. But because of the whole range of technologies involved in this project, it became also a diplomatic case, or if you prefer, a clear example of the importance of techno-science diplomacy for the Western world. So first of all, let's look at what the space defense system he was launching could be about. I'm using this verb could be just because it was a sort of ambition, but this ambition has been not entirely, or at least not in this way, ever implemented. So this is a rather simplified version of what the space defense system could be. And you can see a whole host of different technologies. So you see radars, you see satellites, you see lasers, you see missiles, of course. So a whole range of possible different technologies. So just to give you the sense of how this spaceborne ballistic missile defense would work, we are talking about technologies like high-speed computers, laser beams, and other directed energy devices, space-based devices. And let's go back just to get a look of to have a look of it. We are talking about really tens of billions of dollars invested in these first years of the project, of the program. And as you can just imagine from this picture, the idea that was at the basis of this program was that of intercept incoming missiles from the enemy. So you can see the two enemies on the two sides of the globe. So the Soviet Union on the one side and the United States on the other one, with the two flags. And the way this system was supposed to work was to have most of the missiles, incoming missiles from the Soviet Union, just targeted before in their boost phase. So while they were just launched, that would make this defense system much more efficient, so much more effective in protecting the US territory and the US population. So I just mentioned here very few of the technologies that were supposedly part of this long-term project. So let's say that this project was not something that could be achieved in the medium or in the short term, was something that could be achieved in the long term, even for an optimist, as President Reagan was at that time. But as we have here the responsibility to emphasize the political and diplomatic aspects of science and of technology, I just list in this slide, on the one hand, the problematic aspects of SDI from the political point of view, and the problematic sides of SDI from the technological point of view. So let's say that before being able to think about the implementation of this space shield, there was the need to address a whole set of technological challenges. So the high-speed computers were necessary because all these systems, so for intercepting and for commanding the reaction, needed to be constantly in a framework, so in a network, in order to be able to intercept and immediately react. So high-speed detection, the targeting purpose was indeed part of the problem, the speed of the communication, the need for installation to install in the space something that could produce the power to give these different devices the capacity to react, the capacity to receive commands and to react to the command. and the enormous amount of energy that could be used in case of an attack. So there is, in the documents that I have examined on this issue, there is this calculation made by some Italian experts, and they were saying basically that in case of a massive attack on the part of the Soviet Union, just to respond to the first single attack made with more than 1,000 missiles, there was a necessity to use the 60% of the whole power produced in the United States, the whole power available in the United States, at the maximum of the US capability. So these are the technological or the technical, if you prefer, the scientific challenges. So a huge amount of technological problems that needed to be solved in order to put in place something that could be similar to the blueprint that I showed you. But on the other hand, this is an interesting case because it's a case that has very important, very relevant for the time, diplomatic, political aspects. The very relevant first one was the fact that this idea of deploying something in the space to protect the US territory and the US population was basically impacting deeply on the ongoing, with, different phases, but ongoing negotiations between the United States and the Soviet Union, arms control negotiations. So this process had started in the late 1960s and was proceeding with, some problems along the road, but the two superpowers, especially in the early 1970s, had decided, late 1960s, early 1970s, had decided that their priority was a strategic stability. So it was the fact that they had to be equal in terms of the capability to strike on the adversary territory. In order to guarantee, to ensure this balance of military capabilities, they had signed several agreements. So the first one was that prohibiting, in the late 1960s, 1967, the first one was prohibiting the deployment of nuclear devices in space. So just to say, space is for the whole humankind. We are not going to arm the space with the most powerful weapons that we have available, so nuclear weapons. No deployment of nuclear weapons in the space. But in the meantime, unfortunately, technology evolves. So the fact that technology was evolving made space more and more relevant in terms of detecting and in terms of the network for communications and for military communications. So what happened was that more and more the two superpowers felt the need to regulate their offensive and defensive capabilities. And their second step in this guarantee of strategic stability was the SALT process, so the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties. So one of these treaties in the early 1970s was that regulating the capability to defend themselves from incoming offensive missiles. And so this was not something directly related to the space, but was something related to the arms control process itself. So by saying we have to remain equal in order to be stable, not to be tempted by taking advantage, attacking each other, let's say that we will limit our capability to defend against intercontinental ballistic missiles. The idea presented by Reagan in March 1983 was basically just the opposite of what had been regulated in principle, potentially, what had been regulated with these agreements. So there was the risk of a new arms race in space. This is another linked political aspect, linked to the idea of a space defense set of systems deployed for protecting the territory. Together with this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the whole deterrence doctrine and the whole process of coupling and decoupling between the defense of the United States and the defense of European countries. You know that NATO is the organization for providing defense to all NATO countries. And you also should know that NATO countries have never been so powerful militarily, so powerful as the United States. Why this was the case? Because the United States promised through the Atlantic Alliance and then with the setting up of NATO, so the military organization, promised to provide Europe, Western Europe, with its own ultimate defense. And what it is the ultimate defense? The promise to use nuclear weapons massively in the case of a Soviet attack. So when we talk about coupling and decoupling, what we mean? We mean the necessity to feel on the part of Europeans reassured that the United States feel the responsibility to protect ultimately, I mean, eventually, the territory of European countries of the Allies. Now, what was looming ahead with the SDI proposal, once Reagan presented this proposal, was the risk that the United States would protect its own territory without taking much of the responsibility, once it was fully protected, the responsibility of protecting the European countries. So they felt the risk of a defender, the United States, staying in its own continent under the roof, under the shield of this space defense system, without caring anymore or without caring that much about what would happen in Europe. So this is one of the aspects, the problematic aspects for Europe, but the other one concerned the smaller nuclear powers. And when we talk about the smaller nuclear powers in Europe, we are talking about which countries? I know that, I mean, I suppose that all of you should know that we have in Europe two regional nuclear powers. So one is France, the other one is Britain, so UK. And what could happen to these nuclear deterrents, small nuclear deterrents, in case the two superpowers started an arms race in the space? So the United States basically launching this race and the Soviet Union following suit. What could happen was the total irrelevance on the that could affect the small deterrents of these small powers, because they had just, let's say, a very few hundred of these weapons, and with the shield, there was no more credibility by London or Paris to menace the Soviet Union in case the Soviet Union would move aggressively on the European continent. So this was a whole, again, host of problems, political problems. Now, what I'd like to do with you is to focus a little bit on Europe and on another aspect of the potential problems that SDI was raising. You know that we mentioned before the fact that SDI for working needed high-speed computers, needed connections, I mean, and so communications among these machines. This means basically ICT, so information and communication technology. And let's look at what was the environment in Europe when SDI was launched. Because if we have to assess the political relevance and so the diplomatic problems posed by the launching of SDI, of this research program, we also need to know a little bit more about the European and Italian, to some extent, because we are in Italy, and I would like also to talk a little bit about the Italian reaction. We need to know a little bit more about what was the environment at the time in Europe. And the environment was this, basically, was of a continent already perfectly aware to be, not so advanced in information technology, and information technology was clearly looming ahead as the tool in different sectors of technologically advanced countries, so tool for solving a whole set of problems. Now you see in this slide the picture of the previous, so at the time, the Commission President Etienne d'Avignon, so the president of the European Commission, and he was a key protagonist of this attempt of on the part of European community to try to catch up a little bit on this technology in particular, on information technology in particular, to catch up with the United States. I just mentioned here the program ExPoSTEAM that was launched in 1982 by the European Commission with the idea of helping Western Europe, of course, to develop some sort of research and development capability in this field. Now you see here what was the amount of investment that was provided for the ExPoSTEAM project. You know, this is expressed in ECU all the time. So this was a sort of, I don't know how to call it, a fictional currency that was the result of the pondered, I don't know how to express it, or the different currencies of European countries adhering to the community. And this was just 1.5 billion. And, you know, for the first 4 years of the SDI program, the United States were putting, in the hands of the SDO, so the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization, which was created in 1984, 26 billions of dollars. So you see that there is no proportion at all between the investments made by Europeans and what was done on the other side of the ocean. What about Italy? Of course, what I can tell you is just part of the Italian history, because I cannot access all the documents that I'm sure are kept still away from the eyes of researchers. But I was able to trace some of these efforts made by the Italian government, and in particular made by the Minister of Defense, Giovanni Spadolini. You see him in this picture on the left side, the left-hand side of the picture. You see Bettino Craxi, on the other side, Giovanni Spadolini. Giovanni Spadolini was perfectly aware of the problem that was affecting the Italian economy and was affecting the Italian system, in terms of the whole network of research institutes, of industries working in the defense field, and the political capability of the country to express a vision that could be a vision of modernization. So Giovanni Spadolini attempted to do to adopt two main measures. Let's put it this way. He was proposing, and he was advocating a stronger coordination among European countries, and this was the time when European countries relaunched the Western European Organization, so with the idea of creating a stronger autonomous Europe within the framework of NATO. On the other hand, so he was saying we need to coordinate ourselves because as Europeans, we are too weak as single countries. So through coordination, we can try to get more say when we deal with our major ally. On the other hand, he was trying to improve the synergies within the Italian context, so in the Italian situation itself, so synergies between industries, between institutes for research. And with this purpose, he created the Defense Industry Committee in 1984. So there is basically a time span, so a period of time when Europe and Italy within Europe tries to improve the intra-European coordination. What was let's say, which were the chances for this coordination to be successful in giving these countries a chance to catch up, at least partially, their marginality compared to the technological and scientific capabilities demonstrated by the United States? Not so strong. Not so strong also because, as you can see from this picture and from what I describe as the reason why I show this picture, here you see President Reagan at the center of the picture, and on the right-hand side, the protagonist of this proposal, so the Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, the US Secretary of Defense. And Weinberger, of course, in coordination with the US President, in March 1985, proposed to the allies, not just NATO allies, also other allies, like, for example, Israel, and Japan was another of the allies which received this invitation. All these allies received the invitation to participate to SDI program. So to participate to the SDI program, according to the preferences expressed by Washington, they had to start a negotiation with the United States on a bilateral basis. So coordination was not so welcome in Washington, but bilateral, so single talks with single countries was what Washington preferred. Here you see the guy who was put in charge of the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization. So the organization with the responsibility to develop scientific research and implementation. So research and development means that you need to go ahead with testing once you have concluded your research. So this is the General James Abramson. And this was the guy who conducted most of the negotiations with the countries invited to participate to the SDI program. Why the United States in 1985 decided to make this proposal to go ahead with these bilateral invitations to several countries? Did they really need cooperation by European countries or by Israel or other Western countries, Western allies? Not really. But they had a political goal in mind. They needed to count on a cohesive alliance. I'm talking about NATO first, but not just that. Because after being reelected, so Reagan had the first mandate between 81 and 84. And then in 84, he went for re-election. So he wanted now, after being re-elected, to start again negotiations with the Soviets. And these negotiations, which had up and downs, during the first years of the Reagan administration, had more downs than up. So now for Reagan, the priority was to reassert its own leadership as his own leadership as a leader interested, prioritizing arms control. He had acquired military strength, so he felt much more stronger than the country was before. And so he assessed that that was the right moment for starting negotiations again. We know that this, let's say, potential arms race in space was an obstacle for negotiations because the Soviets were really rejecting the idea of proceeding with the SDI. And so there was the risk that the Soviets could use this division within the Atlantic Alliance, within NATO, to create problems to the United States at the negotiating table. So this was the reason why there was such a deep interest in proposing this cooperation. There was not really the need for technology, European technology, or for European scientific capabilities. And in fact, here I'm just trying to give you the sense of what for European countries, which could be for European countries, the advantages or the risks of this bilateral participation. So we know that European countries were discussing about coordination. They knew that by a coordinating effort, they could maybe have some impact on the decisions taken by the United States, for example, for the future of the defenses of Europe. So they felt that coordination was essential. But on the other hand, there was the United States saying, we are not interested in a coordinating cooperation. We are interested in single country cooperation. So they could not miss the opportunity. And so in this sense, I put this part among the advantages. They could not miss the opportunity to be part of this long-term and apparently, I mean, cutting-edge set of technologies, so advanced technology that promise to be critical for the military uses in the future, but for civilian uses as well. On the other hand, there were risks. What these countries felt they could risk in this bilateral cooperation. I just list here some of the problems that you find in the documents when the European and the Italians among them discussed within the governmental circles what we should do. They felt that there was the risk to be relegated to a role of subcontractors. So subcontractor means that you don't know exactly which is the whole blueprint for a specific kind of technology you want to develop. But you just work on a single piece of that more complex design. And so basically you are denied the access to the real technology. You are just allowed to access to a small piece of that. To be penalized also in terms of the procedures that the Pentagon could put in place in order to have all the different companies or research institutes participate to the different calls for the different projects in which the program could be or would be subdivided. And another risk was that of seeing part of the experts and scientists, national scientists, so scientists working in the national laboratories, in the national institutes, at universities, move to the United States, so brain drain, people that working in the United States would never be able or would never be willing to come back in the future. So to be basically depleted from this from this kind of human resources by the participation to SDI. And so this all these fears to some extent were working, were producing a sort of effect that was the proposal to cultivate a sort of parallel project in Europe, a parallel project in advanced technologies, with a program that was presented, that was launched by the French government in April 1985. Eureka was the sort of parallel project that European subscribed as a program belonging to the European community, through which the European community countries hoped to be able to relaunch their European technology and to some extent to contain the risks of the participation to SDI. So the European Research Coordination Agency, this was the meaning of the acronym for Eureka, was implemented. So was launched and gradually implemented, actually for several years, for decades after it was launched. But did it really manage to contain the problem of, so I give you here just a few elements about the Eureka problem, the Eureka program. So was this program really capable of containing these side negative effects of the participation to SDI? Not at all. Because even France, that was the most reluctant ally in accepting the idea to participate to the SDI program, allowed its own companies, so the French government allowed its own companies to take part in SDI, because they assessed that it was too important for the future of their own single companies. So you see, the national dimension prevailed at the end of the day on the coordinated European dimension. This does not mean that Eureka was not put in place, was not implemented, but it never became the real alternative to the participation to SDI. So the fact that SDI was launched and was successful in attracting the attention and the willingness to take part in it by European countries did not mean that it was then really implemented. And this was just because the United States changed their own mind. Not because, I mean, there was not enough interest in that. Just few words and then I will stop on Italy, just because I was trying to give you the sense of how Italy felt inadequate to some extent to be a relevant protagonist of the participation in this project because of the problems that I was exposing. I mean, the industrial capability of the Italian system in the defense field was not so significant. Italy felt constantly menaced by the more developed capabilities of other European countries like France or Great Britain or Germany. And because of that, Italy, even when was advocating cooperation among European countries, was still pursuing very decisively the cooperation with the United States. But cooperation with the United States did not mean for Italy to abandon the coordination with other European countries for assessing the strategic aspects of SDI. So in that for that matter, for the assessment of the, let's say, the political strategic aspects of SDI, Italy remained firmly anchored to the European and NATO context. So with the rest of the NATO community, they moved together, and they moved together saying that participating to SDI doesn't imply that we approve the strategic concept, which is included, which is embedded in SDI. But Italy signed the Memorandum of Understanding. So in 1986, signed this bilateral agreement for taking part into the SDI program. But at the end of the day, as I was saying, was the United States that changed his mind. And in fact, Italy was just able to get a contract, a very meager contract, I would say, compared to the amount of money invested in the SDI organization. So I just mentioned here, the only trace of a contract I can find in the documents was a contract of $2 million that this company, SNIA BPD, so a company part of the Fiat Group, could get. And that's the only trace of a material, I mean, a real contract I have been able to find. So United States changed their own mind, decided for different, let's call it different paradigm of investments in defense. So no more a whole complex space shield. And Italy was basically just remaining with the only possibility to be part of the EuroCap program once we talk about this kind of advanced technologies. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks. Now we have question time. If you want, if you have any question, any remark. I have a parallel story with aeronautic cooperation, but please.
Alessio Rocci from Brussels University. I was wondering about the agreement of 1986, which was the involvement of the scientists, if there was some communication between the scientific part of the American and the Italian one.
Thank you. The Memorandum of Understanding was negotiated by the two governments, but the whole process that involved the Italian government since the spring of 1985 was a process constantly of constant coordination between CNR, just for giving you one of the example of the institutions involved in the assessment of is it for Italy a good idea to participate in SDI or not? So CNR was one of the most important institutions on the side of research institutions for Italy participating in this. And so Italy created a sort of a cabinet within the government with the participation of the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, industry, state shareholders, and foreign trade, if I'm not mistaken. And this cabinet was the contact point with, the community of the experts. So they constantly asked for advice to understand which were the sectors for the Italian research and for the Italian industry where Italy could, approximately think to play a role and to get a rather relevant role. This community knew quite a lot about other countries' communities, and so there was also the possibility to understand with which country there could be more competition or more cooperation.
Now another question. Sorry. Yes,
Leopoldo Nuti, Professor of International History, Leopoldo Nuti, Professor of International History, Roma Tre University. And my question is related to this slide we're seeing right now. Do we know, can you tell us anything about the other European countries? How many companies signed similar contracts and what was their amount? Is the Italian case the only one of a company which went ahead, or?
There is a book published just a few years ago on NATO countries and their participation in SDI. Of course, one of the problems, with this rather recent publication, is that it's not that easy to access documents and to have with these primary sources enough information about single contracts. What I can say from the documents I've used for my research, from the Italian documents, so there are also traces in these documents about what other countries were doing. Apparently, there was a consortium of industries led by France and one led by Germany. I don't know how much money they got because this is not, something available in terms of clear information. But I think I can say without mistake that the most important partner, even in terms of contracts and the amount of money that these contracts were involving, was the UK. So UK was the first to start, and Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister at the time, was especially pressing on Ronald Reagan, on President Reagan, to be allowed to be a real partner. So to guarantee to UK industries a rather relevant, not so junior role. Did she manage to get that? Not that much. She was not, the time for obtaining this result was not enough, because they signed the memorandum of understanding almost a year before Italy. But even with that, I mean, the process for the call for, allocating the resources was rather long. So they were not really fast enough before the US basically changed their mind and started to disinvest from SDI.
Okay.
Carlo Bacigalupi, thank you for the presentation, very interesting. My question concerns so these malfunctions of the agreement. The agreement was issued, then one of the country, the French, decided to go on with the companies because it was a benefit for the company to proceed. Or similar to this. So to which extent these accidents are due to the fact that the agreement from the beginning was basically containing flaws, or could have been written better in such a way to avoid that independent dynamics in companies?
Let me just say that France did not sign any agreement. So France was the only country saying to its own companies, you can go ahead as companies, I'm not signing anything, because France did not intend to give the United States the possibility to pretend that there was an approval or some sort of approval on the part of Europeans of the strategic concept, because France was totally against any deployment of defenses in space because of the problem I mentioned at the beginning. So a small nuclear power, no way that I will support the idea of space defense, because my deterrent will value basically nothing after that. For the memorandum of understanding, I read it. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not so expert in this sense, but I wouldn't feel that, I wouldn't say that I feel that there were inherent flaws in the memorandum of understanding. But, you know, there was such a disproportion of capabilities. For the Italians, one of the problems was that, and this was one of the report from the CNR, saying we don't have enough human resources to participate in a significant way to both SDI and Eureka. So they were saying to the government, we don't have enough people working on this specific kind of research that can make Italy a relevant partner. Because we can do something for Eureka and then we are not able to participate in SDI. So it was a matter of resources, not just financial, but human resources. So the memorandum of understanding, in my opinion, doesn't have real flaws in terms of the way it is framed. It was decided at the time to sign a memorandum of understanding ex novo, so not using the previous memorandum of understanding regulating military cooperation, because there were already, I mean, other agreements for military cooperation between the United States and single NATO allies. But this was a new one, just to guarantee against all the risks that I was mentioning in the previous slides. So the fact that there could be brain, there could be not equality of treatment when these companies would participate to the calls. But if you don't have enough people, or if you don't have the laboratories, the right places for doing that research, I mean, whatever is the legal framework, it doesn't change any real element on the table.
Do you have any other comments or question? Okay, my opinion, I think, is very interesting. this research because it's another part of operational history, no? In the sense that today we see the same approach from US in space. Do you know Artemis agreements? Are they multilateral agreement or bilateral agreement? And perhaps for other little things like microchips, we have a multilateral approach from Europe when 2 years ago, a little famous, the name is Intel, wanted to open a new plant in Europe. Intel go to European Commission to organize a sort of European table and to discover the best place in European Union to open a plant, or perhaps she goes directly to 2, 3, 4 countries to negotiate by a bilateral way. This is a typical US approach, but not because they are the blue jacket and we have the little Indians. Because they have a coordinated politics in industrial fields, technoscience, etc. They are a union states. We have only since 1992 to 1993 European Union, but we have no a real European industrial politics. Or yes, I don't know. I'm not a specialist of the history of European integration, but perhaps this is not the case. We have some research politics, no? Just in this year, we have the discussion, the negotiation under Jacques Delors Commission for the Single Act, open in 1987, no? With the first framework program. But from the industrial point of view, from the technoscience point of view, Europe was divided. And also today, it's normal, and frankly speaking, I agree with the French government, the Gaullist French government in 1983. Not. There was François Mitterrand, socialist government. This is typical, no? Also for French government to have a national approach in strategic field. This is a real strategic field, but at the same time, the situation was similar for semiconductor, I think, but also on space activities, the national approach. At the beginning of 1970s, European country, the most relevant country in European construction, Western Germany, France, and also UK, decide for intergovernmental cooperation in strategic fields, for armaments, for advanced technology, for aircraft cooperation, for space cooperation. They decided that these fields were no matters for European Commission, European Union, European Economic Community. We have some historical article for this. And this, in this sense, is very interesting, this research. Also, if we think that in 1983, Ronald Reagan suggested this Freedom Space Station as a real common product of Western countries. But also in this case, we have the documents. There were very hard negotiations for the condominium, for the management of this station. And at the end, US government, US administration wanted a bilateral negotiations with each country, not a common negotiation. And European Space Agency was outside, not only because in Europe there were no capabilities as in United States. This was a political choice. And in this sense, I think it's very nice, the history about science and technology, also for present time, because we have sometimes some analytical grids that we may apply also for today. This is a typical case, no? We have different fields, but the slide by Marilena about the fears of all European countries, or better, what could bilateral cooperation with USA mean for European countries. This slide may be used also today, perhaps. I don't know, but perhaps. Anyway, thanks. I don't know if you have any other comments or question. Thanks, grazie. No, viene... Okay, now we have Professor Federico Paolini from the University of Macerata, one of the Italian specialists of the history of environmental policies, and one of the founder, I think, of the society, Italian Society for the History of Environmental Policy. Thanks, you have the floor.
Fantastic. So good afternoon. Okay, this is a short presentation of our project that was part of PRIN 2017 on science and international relations. It was a project about scientists and environmental issues. And the purposes of the study has two main goals. The first one is to examine how scientists contributed in Italy and to environmental awareness in institutions and public spaces. This is a brand new topic inside environmental history because we have no previous researches on these issues. And the second one is to reconstruct a map of the roles played by scientists in the public space. So we have tried to reconstruct this complicated history using multiple kind of sources. The main are archives, and the archives of CNR, Accademia dei Lincei, l'Accademia Nazionale delle Scienze. And we use a science magazine, a science journal like Sapere. It was the first science magazine, first journal founded in Italy during the 30s. It was a very important journal to reconstruct the debate. And we use this, the issues of Sapere between 1960 and 1990. So we examined almost 30 years of the journal Sapere. And then the periodical press, okay, because a lot of issues it's difficult to find a lot of issues inside the archives because some archives are personal archives. It's not easy to access them. So the periodical press is very useful. And the general context is that of the construction of the ecological awareness in the Western countries. And the first step towards the concrete environmental policies was the Swedish initiatives in 1968 to call a conference on human environment. That was held in Stockholm in 1972. So there was the first conference, global international conference on relationships between humans and environment. And the second very important step was the publication of the Limits to Growth report by the MIT for the Club of Rome. And this report adopted a new Malthusian perspective that introduced the concept that the natural resources are not unlimited. And this was a very important turning point in the history of the environment, because it was the first time that some scientists spoke about the limits for the natural resources. And it was the point, it was the beginning of the strong dichotomy between the supporters of the growth, economic growth, and the supporters of the environmental issues, and supporters of the who believe that the growth had some limits. And this dichotomy is not ending nowadays. So this is very, very strong conflict, like scientific conflict, socio-political conflict is very, very, very important. So an American historian called John McNeill spoke that the development had created is opposite. So the antithesis of against the development. So the ambientalism was a sort of antithesis to the development. And we have to think that the initiatives of governments in the environmental field were not motivated by some ethical or ideological intents or impulses. So they didn't want to save the earth, or didn't want to take care of the future of the next generations. But the big issues at the beginning of the 70s was how to save the economic development. This was the real issues, because it was evident at that point all the technologies that were used during the acceleration of the development after the Second World War was very harmful for the environment. So there was the necessity to change the technological asset of our societies. So it was evident at that point that the 90% of technologies had caused severe pollution and severe pollution problems inside the urban areas, and severe depletion of natural resources. So there were two important needs. The first was to implement environmental restoration programs inside the urban areas, but also in general. And the second is not to undermine the development model based on urbanization, industrialization, and consumption. Because we have to think that the major issue was how to implement the consumption, not to reduce consumption. What about Italy? In Italy, the demands from the international context were intercepted by the governments led by Democrazia Cristiana. Not because the Christian Democrat politicians or the Christian Democrat Party had a proper awareness about the problem, about the environmental issues, but essentially because Italy was called to participate in the organizational process of the Stockholm Conference, because the call of the 1968 regarding all the Western countries and not only. But Italy was involved also in the organization of the European Year on Nature Conservation. this is a very, very big issue in 1970 in Europe, where the European community called the first year dedicated to the environment, to nature. And look at the term, because we in general use nature and environment like synonymous, but they are not. When we think to nature, we think of human beings, animals, and plants. But when we think about the environment, we think about resources and how these resources have to be used. The Christian Democrat Party pulled a small number of scholars to participate in these initiatives. In particular, Amintore Fanfani created a group of scientists to study and to write the first reports on the state of the environment in Italy. And this is a very interesting point, because during the 60s and the 70s in Italy, the most important, the most influential scholars were not Italian scholars, but there was American scholars, US scholars. The most quoted scholars working on environmental issues quoted in the Italian newspapers was Barry Commoner. For example, the president, the director of CNR, Vincenzo Cagliotti, was not quoted in Italian newspapers. They spoke a lot about MIT, Barry Commoner, Rachel Carson, the new Malthusian hypothesis like Paul Ehrlich about the population bomb, the Garrett Hardin, and so on, but Italian newspaper never quoted Italian scientists. The only scientist that was quoted a lot was the president of the CNEN, Ippolito, because of the scandal. So the presence of the Italian of any Italian scientist in the newspaper was because of a financial scandal, not because of his work. I think it's very interesting, no? And Amintore Fanfani created this group composed by the president of the CNR, Vincenzo Cagliotti, and other scholars working inside the CNR, inside some university, like Roberto Passino. He was an expert about waters. And Valerio Giacomini, Roberto Marchetti, Giovanni Battista Marini Bettollo, Giuseppe Montalenti, Giorgio Nebbia, Mario Pavan, and Marcello Vittorini. This was the group that led to the preparation of the first reports on the state of the environment in Italy. And in 1971, they published 4 reports. The first one was L'uomo e l'ambiente. The second one is Libro bianco sulla natura in Italia by the Commissione sulla natura of the CNR. The third one was Problemi dell'ecologia, was by a Senate commission created by Amintore Fanfani, that in that period was president of the Italian Senate, and the Rapporto Italiano per la Conferenza di Stoccolma. These scientific reports were all characterized by some recurring conceptualizations. The first one was a very idealistic view of the pre-modern age. In particular, the biologists, zoologists, and so on, they considered the pre-modern age a period in which relations between human beings and nature were inspired by a prudent and far-sighted respect. So it was a sort of archaic period. And this vision was very strong inside the specialists of nature, like biologists, zoologists at the beginning of the 70s. The second conceptualization concerned the nostalgia for the disappearance of rural Italy. There was a very, very strong critique of the processes of industrialization and urbanization, but not because only for the environmental issues, only because there was a sort of a social fear about all these masses coming to the urban areas from the rural Italies. Because the new masses, new citizens of the urban areas were going to change completely the social relationships inside the urban areas. So there's not also just one environmental critique, environmental issues debate, but also a social debate. And the third conceptualization, sorry, is the definition of the environment as nature. At the time, environment meant nature. And this is very important because presuppose a clear separation between human beings and nature. And in this general context, Homo sapiens, the human beings, were considered like sort of destroyers of the archaic state of the earth. And this was an attitude that was very, very strong inside the conservationists. And within this embryonic environmental policy of the Italian governments, a central role was assigned to Eni, which had to play the function of catalyst and incubator of ecological know-how, starting from the preparation of a report on the state of the environment in Italy. And it's a very, I think, singular event to think that the first real report, the first real study on this environmental situation of Italy was prepared not by CNR or by university, but by an industrial firm, no? And this is very singular. And Eni assigned this goal to a new company called Tecneco that was created from a triple need. In this new context where the environmental crisis had become evident and the need to generate some sort of remedies for this crisis was really urgent, the president of the Eni at the time, Raffaele Girotti, considered appropriate to map, to create an additional industrial route for the Eni. And Girotti identified this new industrial route, like to create a new field inside the Eni, devolved to the control of pollution. So this was the idea to create a new company that was to aim to assist the Eni to restore the environment after, for example, the exploitation of natural gases or oil and so on. And at the same time, the Italian governments felt urgent to respond to the demand of supranational institution in view of the 1972 Conference of Stockholm on the Human Environment. So the Christian Democrats pressed the management of the holding company to put its extensive expertise at the service of the construction of environmental policies. And in this, we have to think the role of Raffaele Girotti, that was the president at that time, and another Christian Democrat politician, Arnaldo Forlani, because both they were born in the Marche region. And so there was very, a sort of very clientelar, relationships. And the goal of Girotti and all
Networking, lobbying.
Yeah.
Today is not horse shit, also in USA experience in Europe, but yes.
Yeah. It was an explicit demand from the market territories to use the Tecneco to create jobs inside the market. In fact, one of the problems of the Tecneco was that the main, the main location to establish the Tecneco was Fano in the market and a lot of small communes all around the region. And this made very, very difficult to communicate with the central location of the ENI in Rome and in Milan. And so on. This was very, very contested for the inside management of the ENI. But Girotti and Forlani had to obey from the territories asking jobs. And I found a lot of documents coming from the Christian Democrat Party in the Marche asking to Forlani and to Girotti to create more jobs inside the Tecneco. Because Marche was, had a problem of development. So ENI and Tecneco, so the public company was used like to a source to jobs incubator, if you want. And so the close relationships between Arnaldo Forlani and Raffaele Girotti moved this project of the ENI. And finally, there was also a need for an operational structure that could create concrete synergies between the political parties, the governments, and academia, scientists, and also industry. Because in that moment, all the major developed countries like US, UK, Germany, were very interested in developing a new sector of about the restoration of the environmental problems. And so Italy tried to do the same. And in the early 70s in Italy, this role could only be taken by ENI or IRI. There was another public company. And another strong fact, it was ENI and IRI are competitors in the same territory, because ENI created the Tecneco and IRI created another company to opposite to compete against Tecneco. This is strange because they are part of the public sector, no? So and the management of the ENI were strongly opposed to the management of the IRI. And at that moment, the Democrazia Cristiana was chosen the ENI for the proximity, for the close proximity with the management, because ENI, starting from the Mattei direction, was very close to Christian Democrat Party. So this is the reason why. Also, all the scientists I quoted, like Girotti, Marini Bettollo, were Christian Democrat. So they were very, very close also by their ideologic attitude. So Tecneco became the structure tasked with making operational proposal for action in this dialogue between policymakers, academics, and technology companies. And to cement the relationship with the group of scientists, for example, ENI, the appointment the chairman of the CNR, Vincenzo Cagliotti, inside the Scientific Council of Tecneco. So to strengthen the relationships between any Christian Democrat Party, Democrazia Cristiana, and scientists. And another university professor, Mario Pavan, was appointed counselor of the Tecneco in 1974, and he was sent to represent the interest of the company in Somalia. And there was a report written by Mario Pavan of some dialogues between Pavan and Siad Barre. And Pavan has the mandate to speak, you know, in like a sort of Italian representative. This is another interesting question. So it's interesting because the Tecneco began to implode after the presentation of this first report, la prima relazione sullo stato dell'ambiente, sulla situazione ambientale dell'Italia, that was held in Urbino from June 29 to July 2nd, 1973, in Urbino. And this report was severely criticized by Communist Party and by regions. I think that this strong opposition by Communist Party and by regions determined an art failure of the Urbino Conference. And after Urbino, the ENI decided to stop the experience, the Tecneco, to dismiss the Tecneco company, because Raffaele Girotti left his role inside the ENI, and came another president, Pietro Sette. And Pietro Sette and his new management, they consider the environmental restoration something like a lack of resources, and they consider very important, they consider the main important strategy for ENI, but also for Italy, to restore the environment, to switch to natural gas, to methane. So the use of clean energy was at that moment chosen for the best practice to create, to generate an environmental restoration. So Tecneco was dismissed, and the ENI, also Italy, went to implement the exploitation of natural gases from North Africa, from Russia, and this was a completely change in the politics of the ENI. So the discontinuation of Tecneco representing the sort of shipwreck of fair-sighted intuition of Raffaele Girotti, that did not represent anything different from the intention of Nixon, for example, or those of the more prudent European governments, creating a fair condition for their country to gain a competitive advantage in a strategic sector as the environment restoration. So Italy went out to this new industrial field. And I think that the cultural backwardness, the political agon, and it was very blocked by ideological myopia in that time, and also the emergence of the nascent regional power centers and the ambiguity of the Communist Party contributed to the sinking of the Tecneco. And I think that we have to focus the attention on the role of the Partito Comunista, because I have also spoke about the ambiguity or the duplicity of the Partito Comunista, because Partito Comunista was I can say this, I think that the politics of the Communist Party as it was not to present a real alternative to that of the Democrazia Cristiana, but its real objective, the politics of the Communist Party, was to protect not the environment, but labor. They want to protect jobs. So this is the ambiguity because the Communist Party spoke against the initiative of Democrazia Cristiana, but inside the territories, in the regions, the government, they did the same things the Christian Democrat Party did in other places. So this very ambiguity of this politics. And I think that a good result of this research, it was to make possible to define the attitudes of the Italian scientists toward environmental problems. And I think we can summarize the attitudes of Italian scientists in 4 positions. The first one I call anti-modern. The second is technocratic elitist. The third is anti-system or countercultural. And the fourth is technical pragmatic. The anti-modern attitude was proper of the naturalists, zoologists, ecologists, as well as the conservationist environmentalism, like, for example, organization like Italia Nostra, Pro Natura, or the WWF, the Italian section of the WWF. And I think that for these scholars, these scientists, the most prominent fact that was that Homo sapiens was the destroyer of the pre-modern natural world. And this anti-modern vision contained, in my opinion, an aversion to those uneducated masses that invade urban space in their attempt to escape poverty. And there was a sort, I think that these scholars saw this like a sort of apocalypse, a social apocalypse. And thirdly, the development model based on binomial industrialization and urbanization was considered like a sort of irredeemable crisis of Western society. So because of the crisis of traditional values and so on. So this is the first attitude. The second one, there was the technocratic or elitist attitude. And this second attitude was based on the new Malthusian perspective theorized by the reports of the Club of Rome. Not only the first one, because the first one is limits to growth, but the MIT wrote 5 reports for the Club of Rome. So, and I think this attitude found the consensus of liberal and the bourgeois circles. And among scientists, this attitude was proper of the prominent personalities, so the international scholar, like, for example, in Italy, Adriano Buzzati Traverso. They was very close to the international context, so it is that, science is not democratic, so the elite of scientists had to sort of the privilege to govern, the society. So it was a very technocratic approach. And during the 80s, this approach was relaunched again by the chemist Enzo Tiezzi, who wrote an important book, Tempi storici e tempi biologici. And he updated the new Malthusian theory with the theories of Nikolai Georgescu-Roegen about the entropia. The third attitude was that of the countercultural circles. In Italy, probably the most known actors were Giulio Maccacaro, who was a physician, who created the Medicina Democratica. And the second was probably the physicist Marcello Cini. And they were both very, very close to the youth movement and to the party outside, you know, on the left side of the Communist Party, like, for example, Democrazia Proletaria. So they had a very ideological approach. And their approach, is, you know, is very ideological. So after the 70s, and no more, you know, no more lost a great part of his importance. But they have probably one merit that we sort of spoke about the working environment conditions and the workers' health. And because, for example, at that time, the condition of the working environments and also the health of workers had no part of the rhetoric of the public discourse of the environmental organizations. Finally, the fourth approach was the technical pragmatic, and it was the approach of the vast majority of the scientific community of the Italian scholars. And this approach had two main visions. The first vision is a vision that have some confidence in science and its application, but added the confidence in science with a proposal for a structural change of the model of development and for a social model. For example, an Italian scholar proposing a new approach to society, a new approach to environmental issues was Giorgio Nebbia. But inside this group, the majority of scholars had an approach that was very essentially strictly pragmatic, with the sole objective of solving problems by using the technological solution available at that moment. So they are very technical approach, a pragmatical approach. And it's interesting because the members, the scholars of the second group, they were invisible in the public space because their concrete and practical work not only did not make news, their approach was not attractive for newspapers, for the public debate, but also, I think is an important point to remark, is that their approach depowered the alarmist and catastrophic narrative. And so they were also disliked by the environmental movement because they were willing to apply non-dogmatic solutions, such as, for example, the use of nuclear energy to produce clean electric energy. Because at the end of the 70s, after the second energy shock of the 1979, the debate about clear energy became a big issue also inside the environmental debate. And one of the, probably the real one, concrete possibility to produce clean energy in that moment was nuclear energy. Because at that time, the solar technologies, wind technologies were in their initial states. So the real alternative, the real concrete alternative to fossil fuels was the nuclear one. And so also inside the scientific community and the scholars community was a big debate that opposite scholars, they are against nuclear energy. For example, Buzzati Traverso was against the nuclear use for the production of electricity. Carlo Bernardini, another physician, was strongly in favor of use of nuclear. And so this created a very, very hard debate inside the community. So just to conclude, our research stopped at the beginning of the 90s. And so we caught just in the early stage, in the early phases, a new phenomenon, which is is going to become very important in the coming decades until nowadays, and is the anti-science approach, because the transformation of the environmental movement in a radical sense had an important role to create a general attitude against science. And this was a big issue at the end of the 80s, but we stopped the research at the beginning of the 1990s, so we had not the possibility to study this aspect, this new issue. But I think the anti-science could be very important, very interesting to understand the debate inside the environmental debate during this period. Thank you.
And now, before the break, we have some minutes for some question, if you want. Okay.
Well, thank you. I'm curious as to how this worked transnationally at the time. Like in Germany, Rudolf Barrow was, you know, the Greens, they were extremely, not only in Germany, I mean, he influenced a lot of environmental politics. And I wonder how that sort of played into or not Italian environmentalism and environmental politics at the time. Thank you.
Yeah, I study mainly the Italian case, so, but yes, probably if we study Germany or also France, we can find similar, I think, similar scenarios. Because also in Germany, in that moment, at the end of the 70s, the Green Party splitted in two, between a radical part with Rudolf Barrow and another more and I think it's interesting. Unfortunately, there were no works also at an international level, because I found just one book published on the relationship between scientists and nature, the environment, also for the US. I didn't find articles or books for the other European cases, but I think that probably if you compare, for example, Italy or Germany, where there were a very strong movements against nuclear energy, for example, at the beginning of the 70s, probably we can find very similar scenarios. But yeah, but I
saying that in the Italian case, it was the Christian Democrats who speared.
Yeah, yes, in Italy was a very short moment. It was almost 5 years from 1968 to 1972, in which Amintore Fanfani, just one politician, probably because he understood the importance to connect Italy to other contests, like the US contest or the North European contest, want to create also in Italy, you know, a sort of a think tank about environment questions, environment issues. But when Amintore Fanfani lost his power inside the party, all this, you know, all this politics, all this was completely interrupted. In fact, this group of scientists in 1991 resigns from their jobs inside the CNR or the university, because they had no more an institutional, you know, reference inside the Italian parliament or the Italian political parties. It's a very singular history, and we have to wait for the Green Party, the Italian Green Party, to found again this you know, these issues inside the public space, the Italian debate. But we have it. We are at the beginning of the 90s.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any more questions or remarks?
Alessio Rocci from Brussels University. Thank you very much for this interesting talk. It was very interesting what you were saying at the beginning about, if I understand correctly, when scientists understood that there were limited resources, then this triggered more an economic interest than. Well, I would like to ask you if you can say more about the sources, about how you discovered this process, and maybe if there is some places where to read more about it.
Yes, I think that the scientists divided into attitudes. One was to support development with the new technologies. So the idea was to develop a new technology to support and to implement the development. And another part of the school of the scientists, mainly coming from the naturalistic scene, like biologists, zoologists, were completely against development. So they said we have to stop development. And this is the idea of the growth. And this is a very dichotomy that I think this never recompose again, because now we have in the same situation. There are probably the majority of scientific community in favor of development, and they to try to develop new technologies, like, for example, nowadays, solar energy, wind energy, and so on. And there are a lot of scholars that created that we have completely changed our attitudes, try to create a new attitude, probably new ways of life, the growth also, no? I think just it's Einaudi just published a book about the communist degrowth. It was by a Japanese philosopher. Now in this moment I don't remember the name, but it is very interesting because these two approaches are it's very difficult to create a dialogue between these two approaches, because this is like, as that dialogue between deaf people, because one part that they created that we have no alternative to economic growth, and the other they consider that they think that economic growth is a sort of apocalypse coming, no? And yeah, the sources there are a lot, and mainly mainly probably the newspapers, but also archives. The problems of the archives that they are very, very they are private archives because they are usually archives of the scientists. So in some cases, we can find these archives inside some institutions like the Accademia dei Lincei or Accademia delle Scienze Nazionali. In many cases, it's not possible to access these archives. Yeah, so. But it's very interesting because this is a history, a story that is still untold. So I think that we have just to study.
Okay. Only a few words about the role of Italian Communist Party in this story from an historiographical point of view. For the historiography. Okay, thanks.
There's a lot of historiography about Communist Party and the environment because there are no relationship between environment and Communist Party for a long time. It's interesting because the first time that Communist Party discovered the environment was for the general election, the national election of the 1987. And because, not because, I think this is my opinion, not because Communist Party has an idea, has a proper idea about environment issues, but because it had fear of the Green Party. So Communist Party probably at that time thought that the Green Party could stolen a lot of votes, and so the National Board of Communist Party decided to candidate two scholars, to Enzo Tiezzi, there was the chemist, and another one was Laura Conti. Laura Conti was a physician, a doctor, who assisted women that have a problem during the Seveso accident. And Laura Conti supported women that had to abort, cause the dioxin during the Seveso accident. So the Communist Party decided to candidate Laura Conti and Enzo Tiezzi, and the chemist that just published 3 years before Tempi Storici, Tempi Biologici, to show to the public, to the general debate that Communist Party took care of the environment too, not only for labor and jobs, but also for the environment. But for me, just a sort of masquerade, like just with the idea of didn't lose votes by the Italian Green Party.
Okay, thanks so much. And now we make a little break, some minutes, and then we will start with the space. Okay, thanks. Thanks. Good evening. We have the last session, about 1 hour. This is on space diplomacy, personal factor, the title. For me, it's a very pleasure because we have, first of all, Dr. Olga Dubrovina, and she is postdoc in Padua since Horizon 2020. We met for the first time in just before COVID. She published several articles. We quoted yesterday one of these articles about Krassin. Yes. She has gave his book, draft book in English now about, Soviet cooperation, 1998, is the translation of his Italian book about Microphone, please.
About Soviet fascist collaboration, not in space, between the interwar period.
Yeah, very interesting. I read things, but from Western archives. But why have this panel today? Because during the last contract, the postdoc Olga Dubrovina had to interview some witness. One is Dr. Fabio Favata. And before starting the intervention by Olga, I pass microphone to Fabio Favata and I ask him to present himself.
Thank you. I'm not an historian by any standard. I'm originally a scientist, a physicist, an astrophysicist who worked for 35 years for the European Space Agency. In the last 20 years, effectively being responsible for the international relations between the European Space Agency and partner agencies such as, well, Roscosmos in the case of Russia, NASA, the Japanese Space Agency, and so forth, in the domain of space science. So I was responsible, for example, for negotiating the various treaties, memorandum of understanding between Europe and the various partners for what concerns space science missions. So in a sense, I lived the history that Dr. Dubrovina is going to present from the cold phase, as the Brits would say, being the one who had to negotiate, to meet with the counterparts and negotiate the discussions and so forth. And I had the pleasure of being interviewed by Dr. Dubrovina. And let me say that at the end of the interview, I think I've learned more than you did, Olga, in the sense that I discovered, you made me reflect a lot on why it was important for you to see things also from the point of view, from the perspective of somebody who was there, as opposed to documents and archive. But I'll let you go through your material and then I'll comment more on this.
No, one second only. This is very nice, very important, because Olga tried to realize very difficult maneuvers, because as you know, it's impossible to go in Russia for archives, but she got several elements from European Space Agency archives, and I want to thank so much Gerardo Bonini, now retired, and the director of this archives, because we met a very nice cooperation in the sense that with the European Space Agency, they open the Soviet Russia and Russia files for us. This is very important. But also in NASA, in other archives, French archives, etc., etc. But this is a very nice example how, for us, it's important to interconnect archives with witness of the recent past, to divine, to discover dynamics. For this reason, this is only one of the interviews made by Dr. Dubrovina that we will put in this new series of oral history in the European Union archives in Florence on science diplomacy and space diplomacy. This is a very important and difficult exercise. And now you have the floor. Thanks so much.
Well, I will share immediately with you my crisis that I think I undergone some 1-2 years ago. When I've already started this topic, when I was interviewing people, I was reading books, etc. I was going ahead with these issues, and then I asked myself, but what can I give to this? What could be my contribution to this space history, history of space exploration, etc. Because when I started participating in all these international conferences organized by astrophysicists, astrophysicists, and when I heard them talking about space, with all this vocabulary, very difficult for me. I don't understand that when they speak, and it's a very when, for example, 2 days ago I was in Madrid. I was in ESAC, European Space Astronomical Center, and I was there for 2 days. And it's terrible when you don't understand anything. Even images that they show, you don't understand, you can't interpret them. And I was asking myself, but what can I do? What can I add? And how can I contribute to this history without all this technical background and just history of international relations, history of Soviet Union? And I think that I understood what is I don't want to say my contribution, our contribution of historians, pure historians, is to put all these small stories, and today I will speak about these small stories, in a context, in international and national context, and to understand the contribution of this project, the role of every participant inside this project, and to design the whole image of what's happened, not only inside one project and one mission, but during the period. Okay, so I will today I won't speak about the international relations. My focus is, as I was asked, is on interpersonal relations. So I just want to speak about. You see how I am strong in technology, Fabio. Sorry. Okay. So 4 projects that I started in my book, just in order to illustrate how it worked during the Cold War and during the end of the 80s. So Vega Giotto, Phobos mission, Bion, and Integral. I will stop on Integral because Dr. Favata will explain rather better than me the main objective of this project and the participation of different international members in this project. I just want to, my talk today is like a sort of contribution, the introduction to Dr. Favata's talk. So what about the personal contribution or in this project? Just starting from Vega Giotto project, it was an international mission. Maybe you heard about this, so I don't want to describe this this project. Regarding the Soviet Union, the international collaboration was carried out in 2 levels. So the first one was the participation in this international committee that was created by the members of this international mission. It was France, it was European ESA, European Space Agency, it was Japan, it was the Soviet Union, the participants of this group, and United States. So they created this this group in order to carry out the project, and maybe. So I don't want to talk too much about this. I just want to say that it was carried out in '86, and it was the 2nd year of Gorbachev's perestroika. The project started at the end of '70s and was carried out during all the first half of '80s. And you remember, as specialists of international relations, you remember perfectly what type of period it was for in relations between East and West. And nonetheless, despite these tensions, despite these geopolitical tensions, this project was carried out, even because the center figure of this project was Roald Sagdeev. He was at that time, he was the president of the director of the Institute for Space Research of Academy of Sciences in the Soviet Union, who had this very clear idea that Soviet space, scientific space, I'm speaking now about scientific space and about scientific exploration, could be carried out only thanks to and only based on the international collaboration. Because he was a scientist, he was very well aware about all problems that Soviet program already was undergoing during this period, and he understood perfectly that the only way to go ahead with the exploration of space for Soviet Union was to establish the international collaboration. And he was in this project. He was the central participant, the central member, and then it's on the Soviet side On the European side, I would say that the most important figure was Jacques Blamont, who started this project with Sagdeev, who was very disappointed when Sagdeev changed this project from Franco-Soviet to Soviet, European, Japanese, American, etc. But still, they continued to collaborate together. So the Jacques Blamont was one of the biggest supporters of this collaboration between Soviets and French, especially. When this project ended and when it successfully was implemented successfully, all the group of the scientists who participated in the project was invited where? To Vatican. And it was John Paul II who invited all these scientists, and there are photos now. I didn't add this photo to the slides. And he called them peacemakers. So I don't know if it was for the first time that Pope, that somebody called scientists who carried out this international project peacemakers, but it was these words became famous thanks to the collaboration inside this project. I just want, before I finish speaking about this project, I just want to come back to the SDI and the Sagdeev. Sorry. And how can I go back? C'è a sinistra, questa qua. No, questa avanti, questa indietro. Ok. Space, international relations, science, SDI was considered by Soviet historians and Russian historians was considered as one of the causes, one of the reasons that caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. And Sagdeev was one of the supporters of the idea that Soviet Union hadn't to compete with the Americans, because otherwise it would bring Soviet Union to the tragic end. And it was Sagdeev that during the international one of the international meeting that spoke about laser that Soviet wanted to use during the mission, and it was just to say that we Soviet people we will use laser beams. That you spoke about this technology. We will use laser beams in order to the scientific exploration of space, underlining that Americans at that time were using it for military purposes. So it's just a thing that I wanted to add to your talk. Then another project, another collaboration, it was a fellow collaboration, was on board of Phobos. Phobos, it was a spacecraft that was sent by Soviets towards the the moon's satellite, Phobos. And more or less the same teams, the same international team that collaborated on board of Vega spacecraft, collaborated on board of Phobos mission. And it was a failure. It was the last project that Soviet Union didn't succeed to launch, but didn't succeed to implement, not because of launch, but because of spacecraft. There were two probes. And there were lots of international experiments on board, and it was a very big disappointment for all the international participants. And it was the proof that, sorry, I didn't say that it was 1988, it was the proof that Soviet space program wasn't so at so high level as Sagdeev himself, because he was the head of this project also, as he wanted to describe and to show to their international counterparts. And I want to speak about these two projects, BIONS and Integral. Integral, as I said, Dr. Favato will explain better than me. So I want to just to briefly to speak about BIONS. BIONS, they were Soviet spacecraft for biological and medicine experiments on board. They started in 73. The first BION was launched. And from 75, American and French scientists participated in these missions. So these missions were launched, became international from 75, and the last Beyond the Tens was launched in 92. And the next Beyond, if I'm not wrong, it's the name is Beyond M. I don't know if you've heard. Beyond M was postponed. The launch of Beyond M was postponed. I'm speaking about nowadays situation. Was postponed. It had to be launched this year. It will be launched. We don't know, maybe. And there was a collaboration with Americans and French, and it's not clear if this collaboration will still last. So I want to speak about these Beyonds with the participation of Americans, French, and ESA. So my question was how ESA, European Space Agency, when ESA started participate in this project, why so late compared with American and French participation, and what were the features of this participation? So as I said, French and American started their collaboration on Beyonds in 75, Europeans in 87. So more than 10 years, 10 years later, even if they were interested, the first meetings had place at 78, 79. But Europeans were very, how to say, cautious about this cooperation. Even if French, as I said, and Americans were going ahead, and they participated with a lot of experience on board of Soviet spacecraft. But for Europeans, it was first the political question, the risk of technological leaks. And then they didn't want to participate with animals. So for Soviets and Americans, it wasn't a problem to launch animals in space. For Europeans, it was a problem. So they wanted just to participate with some cells and plants, etc. As I said, in archives, there are a lot of documents about this mission, because there are protocols of meetings, so you can follow the development of this mission. There are some reports of Europeans who went to Moscow, because they collaborated with Institute for biomedicine problems in Moscow. So they went there. The first trip was in 78. They started, they followed these missions, they followed the presentations of results. So they were already presented, but still they didn't take this decision in order to participate in the mission. Because, as I said, because of political reasons, because it was the beginning of 80s, because ESA is has very, how to say, complicated process, decision-making process, due to the fact that there are a lot of European countries that take part in this institution, and it's not so easy to find the common decision, the common way to deal with, for example, with Soviet Union, that was a rather toxic country for ESA. So finally, in 87, they decided to collaborate, and they decided to collaborate some months early. So they hadn't a lot of time to prepare their instruments, to prepare their experiments, just to start. So it was the decision just to start to collaborate with Soviets. And the first groups of scientists went in Soviet Union in order to prepare their experiments. I was very happy, and I think I was very lucky to speak with this person that you see on the photo. His name is Evgeny Ilyin. He's a Russian scientist, a Russian biologist. I spoke with him twice. And another important thing that during the first interview, you have some type of information. During the second interview, it's another type of information, sometimes controversial. And you try to understand the reason of these different replies. As for example, in his case, I have to say that he died. He died last year, at the end of last year in September. And when when I contacted him for the third interview, he didn't reply. I asked to the institute what was the reason. They explained. And one of my questions, for example, was how did you contact Europeans? How the collaboration was born between Soviets and the Europeans? And his first reply was, because once we thought, why do we collaborate with Americans? Why do we collaborate with French? But why don't we collaborate with Europeans? It's so interesting to collaborate with ESA. They have so interesting instruments and technologies, so why not? It was his first reply. The second time, when I asked the same question, he said, you know, we don't decide anything. Our heads, you know, it's a very Russian way to say, our very high authorities asked us if we were interested to collaborate with Europeans. We said, of course. And we started collaborating with Europeans. So it was a very high level decision from Soviet government in order to start collaboration with Europeans. And it was made in the second half of the 70s, more or less. So this was the very beginning of collaboration between Soviet biologists and European biologists in space. So this capsule that you see is Bayon's Bayon aircraft, Bayon and Photon. It's mixed. I just want to say that I interviewed a Russian biologist. I interviewed him, and he was very happy to speak about his how to say the years when he was very active, the years when he was the head of this project, and he was very happy to speak. It was during the war already, so it was 23. He was very happy to remember how the collaboration was fruitful, important for both sides. How obviously he didn't want to speak about very technical details with me. I mean very political details. Okay, it was obvious. That's why when I say that every interview it has its own limits. Okay, I perfectly understand these problems. The photo that you see, this one, for example, the next one, this one was took in Amsterdam, in Netherlands. This one was taken in Russia, sorry, in Soviet Union, and on the background you see the model of the Mir station. So all these international groups of scientists together. And this photo, I like a lot this photo that was made by Antonio Verga. He's an engineer, and he was somebody who collaborated from European side on the Photon mission. It's another mission, I won't talk about it. And these photos that I would say that demonstrates the interest, the real cultural interest towards towards the country where they collaborated. And as Eileen said, it was the basis of the collaboration. So this curiosity, this very personal interest towards the culture of other people. Some of them learned, for example, Russian. A lot of Russian spoke English, even if, maybe you will correct me, maybe if there were interpreters, but it's another very interesting question that I have no time to deepen. Another photo that you see, it's the moment of when Russians, it's very typical Soviet flat. I recognize it very well. When they invited their European colleagues at home, and as one of my people who I interviewed told me, it was forbidden for Russian, for Soviet scientists, it was forbidden to invite foreigners at their flat, and they did it. And it was another, how to say, feature, another basis of the very strong and strict collaboration between them. And now I will give the floor to Dr. Favata just to introduce this project. I think that's the most interesting, maybe after Bayon, yes, the most interesting project that I started Because when I was introduced to this project, the scientist, and it was Courvoisier, he told me, you know, but there was this very interesting project. We Europeans, ESA, we launched our telescope with Russian rockets for free. How it was possible to use Russian rockets for free in order to use to launch European telescope. So the deal was really very interesting. Russians, it was Soviet first and Russians then, were very interested in to have data directly from space. And they hadn't means anymore. They hadn't telescopes anymore because of a lack of funds, because of political situation, etc. And another key figure that we have to mention today, it was Rashid Sunyaev. He wasn't the head of a Russian Soviet Institute, but he was head of his department, and he was one of the powerful. I discovered it yesterday. He was one of the powerful men in late Soviet Union and in 90s in Russia, still is, who got the rockets from first the Soviet authorities and then from Russian government, who got these rockets in order to launch this European telescope, not for free. Yes, the Europeans didn't pay. They paid for modifications. Yes. But they give and they continue to give until the mission won't be deorbited. It will be deorbited because of the last events recently. Yes, I didn't understand this year or next year. So will do soon. Yes, because of the events. Otherwise, it would remain until 29. I think it was a deadline. And the Russians continue to get 25% of scientific data that this telescope receives from space. And yes, the key figure of the collaboration between, I was criticized by French side because, as they said, Italians, I live in Italy. It's easy for me. It's easier for me to speak with Italians than with French, but it was my mistake. I had to apologize. In front of French. So I reconstructed the history of this project that started with Giovanni Bignami, astrophysicist from Milan. This is another collaboration that was before the integral, Pietro Bertini, and who in this moment in Lavochkin, just to make you understand that during the Soviet period, it was the plants, one of the most secret plant in rockets and missiles producer in Soviet Union. And now they are already in 90s, where Ubertini and his team is visiting this plant. And this is Pietro Bertini and Rashid Sunyaev, the key person that I told before. So I finish here, and I think that it was a sort of introduction to Dr. Favado's talk.
Well, first of all, thank you, Olga.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Olga, for this very interesting look at how Soviet and then Russians work together with Europeans. And let me say that when I was contacted by Doug and Olga originally, I was a bit perplexed because I said, okay, I mean, there's tons of papers concerning ESA-Russian cooperation. There is, more paper in the archive than any sane person would want to access. So I was wondering, why the interest to speak with people like me? Yes, we were there, but what's your point? And I must say, in our very pleasant conversation and very interesting for me, I soon realized how much the papers in the archives are at best reticent, and often they lie straightforwardly. So that, and of course, I fully understand that if you're looking at events of a couple of 100 years ago, there isn't much more that you can do to look at papers, because of course, all the people that were there tend to be dead, and that's a bit of a challenge. But for events that are more recent, of course, it is only by talking with people that you realize how much, the partial view that you get from the papers, from the archives, in particular from the official documents. Use of the word which it's much used in Russia and also in our relations with China, which is the protocol of a meeting. Normally we, in the Western world would use minutes, but I know the Russian and Soviet colleagues and Chinese colleagues are very fond of having protocols of meetings. And for example, I've attended meetings, in particular in China, in the early days. Things have changed now, but when I started working with China, in which the protocol of the meeting was written well ahead of the meeting, so that you were sure that the conclusions were set before the meeting, which meant that the meeting was largely for the show. And of course, I can imagine a historian 50 years from now looking at those documents, everybody's dead, and the poor soul will think, okay, this is what actually happened. And in fact, not, because again, this was written well in advance of the meeting to assure that nobody could possibly, deviate from the party lines. So the papers are, of course, essential. I'm not for a moment saying your archival research is not essential. It is, of course, but there is more to the scene. And I think by speaking with people, interviewing people who are actually there, you uncover more, you uncover much more, you uncover the reasons behind things. We were chatting earlier, and you mentioned the quote unquote free rocket that Europe got from Russia. Well, started with Soviet Union and then it became Russia. And you mentioned to me that you saw lots of technical documents that were studying the various options and discussing whether an American rocket or a European rocket or a Russian rocket would be technically better for this mission and so forth, while everybody knew there was an alternative to the Russian rocket, simply because money was not there for any alternative. So it was either a Russian rocket or a Russian rocket. But of course, this couldn't be said because it would be very embarrassing for both Europeans and Americans, who were originally key partners of the integral mission, and they more or less defaulted. Let's call a spade a spade. And so one had to sort of justify what was, you can argue whether it was actually a choice, because it was it was the only way out of the conundrum. And it was also a political choice, which had to be dressed up, also because there was a face-saving exercise for the French. You couldn't possibly say that the French, of course, were building Ariane and wanted Ariane. So you had to find the reason, apparently technical reason for justifying this choice. And this couldn't be put in any piece of paper, because of course this would be slightly embarrassing to put it mildly. And so there you produce all those papers, then go into the archive and dress this up as a technical choice, whereas it was a very, very political one, and one driven also by money, by economical reasons. And those things cannot always be said. I mean, sometimes they're hinted that. You were talking about SDI earlier, and somebody mentioned, I can't remember who was the International Space, you mentioned the International Space Station and the fact there are bilateral rather than multilateral agreements. And if you look at ISS, it's, well, of course, it's a technological wonder, but it is also, to echo the words of the Pope, a peacekeeping operation that was set up when Soviet Union was collapsing. There were way too many very smart Soviet engineers that were looking for jobs. And of course, some unsavory countries were offering jobs to those people. So it was much wiser to recruit them for, you could argue, a project which had limited scientific usefulness, but great political usefulness. And of course, this is also the kind of things that you cannot put on paper. So I really appreciated working with you, how important it is, the role of people who have been there and who can tell you what actually happened. And of course, there is a fine line to walk. You interview them too early, and the things are too fresh. And of course, you can't embarrass your colleagues who are still active and whatever, so you are not going to tell you the whole story. And of course, if you wait too long, they will become, well, maybe a bit too old to remember what happened to begin with. So, you have to walk a fine line in interviewing people at the right moment when they are, things can be looked at that with a bit of recoil, and therefore it's no longer, it's almost history, it's no longer today's events, it's almost history. People can give you very, very interesting and useful information, which is, again, not necessarily going to be written. And I really appreciated what you were saying about the Pope's comment on the Vega project, because I certainly lived this experience personally very, very many times. You also made the point of the cultural interest, which in my opinion is fundamental for any real cooperation in space and any real space policy. And space has been, luckily, I would say, space science, I should be very careful in the choice of words, space science has been traditionally a domain of peaceful cooperation, even in the most difficult times. I mean, I was delighted to have this conversation with former head of NASA, former NASA administrator, Charles Bolden, who is now retired since some time, and he was a Marine general who was administrator of NASA. Before that, he was an astronaut. And he was the commander of one of the shuttle missions that docked on the Mir station, which was a perfectly pointless exercise from the scientific point of view, but it was an amazing thing from the diplomacy point of view. And I remember Charlie Bolden telling me, because, you know, when the then administrator called me up and said, Charlie, I want you to be the commander of this mission, I was really taken aback. I said, look, sir, I am a Marine general. I've been trained to kill Russians, not to shake hands with them. And so, you know, he was rightly saying, you know, why do you want me to do that? I mean, you know, normally I'm told to shoot a Russian aside. And the administrator insisted for him to do that. And he told me it was the best experience of my life. You know, he was really serious. He said, look, you know, I had to go to Moscow, live in Moscow for a few months, learn Russian. It was, you know, both parties had to speak their language in case of an emergency. And they learned, you know, Russians are people too. You know, they have children, they love their children. And, you know, imagine yourself during the Cold War, a Marine general. This is not the first thing to think about. Of course, that's the enemy. So diplomacy, space diplomacy, science diplomacy, you know, I really felt how important it was to build bridges. And this was an amazing tool to do that. It was an amazing way of getting together, it's been an amazing way of getting together people who normally wouldn't speak with each other. And it's a slow process, you know, integral. You've shown pictures of Rashid Sunayev and Pietro Bertini, you know, they're all old friends. The only reason for which this thing actually worked was personal trust. Because one thing you also quickly learn when you start doing this job is that memorandum of understanding, you know, the papers you talked about SDI, whatever, they're not worth the ink and the paper they're printed with. Because, you know, they cannot be enforced. If the counterpart defaults, we're going to invade them, send tanks? Of course not. So they only work on the basis of mutual trust. And trust is something you build slowly. You need to know people. And this is something else that you're never going to find in the official documents. How do you build the trust? What is the process? What is the way that two people coming from completely different cultures, you know, Soviets and Western and NATO country citizens during the Cold War, they were not normally meeting each other in the street and sharing a drink, of course. And yet they were able to build this trust relationship. And believe me, it's a slow process. I jokingly said more than once that to work in international relations in ESA, you have to have a very good liver, because the amount of drinks you have to swallow when building this trust is much bigger than any healthy person should do. And not only with Russia, believe me, you know, I can tell you, in most countries, the first thing, oh, let's have a drink together. And it's a slow process in which you have to get to know people, get them to know as individuals, not as officials. The official part is important, but it's insufficient. You show the wonderful picture of people sharing a meal in somebody's house. Sharing a meal is fundamental for any human being. I still remember one of these are directors who was not necessarily very successful from this point of view of understanding other cultures. He wanted to do something with Chinese colleagues on manned space flight, astronauts flying. And so he was a very busy person, so he used it to fly to Beijing for a meeting, arriving with a 4 a.m. flight to go to his hotel, take a shower, have the meeting, fly out with the midnight flight. And he did this like, you know, every 4 months for 2 years. And then, you know, after 2 years, he was rather irritated with his Chinese counterpart saying, look, you know, we discuss, and this is not advancing. And then the Chinese director looks at him and says, how many times have we had dinner together, you and I? Because of course he was breaching this very fundamental point of building personal trust. Chit chat, sitting together, sharing a drink, telling about each other's family or pets or family history, whatever, it doesn't matter. You know, creating the interpersonal chemistry, that's something else you're never going to find in the archives. And, you know, Western scientists trusted Rashid Suniev. And, you know, they saw his human side. I remember being a bit shocked at meeting him at a conference, because of course he was a very privileged gentleman when, you know, he was one of the Soviets who could travel freely in the Western world, which of course meant something back then. And as many people did back then, he used it to buy luxury items when he was traveling to Western country to bring back to Russia, I suppose, to his wife. And then one day I saw him buying baby food. And I understood things were changing quickly in the Soviet Union. Because you know, this is the kind of things, again, you're never going to find this in the archival paper, but this gave people the feeling how the economic situation in the Soviet Union was starting to become very, very, very different. Was not the one that it was before. But this also showed his human side. So when he was discussing this, he understood, okay, you know, we're talking about with somebody who is really another human being with which we can do business. So this trust building is at the basis of space diplomacy, of international agreements. In the archives, you'll find the papers, which say many things that are completely irrelevant, which nobody has actually read except for a few lawyers who wanted to cross the T's and dot the I's. And well, I hope you didn't read the legal bits, Olga, because honestly, the legal bits are as boring as a doornail. In fact, you know, when I was responsible for those documents, the agreement was that our lawyers would provide a draft. I would ignore 99% of it and concentrate on the few provisions that made any sense to me. And then all the things like, you know, all the things that lawyers get excited about, it was their bit. But again, you know, we never went back to those things. So, you know, I even wonder why they were done. But again, the papers will give you an important part of it, but not necessarily the only part. So it's really something that I really commend your approach of trying to listen to the people who were there a few years afterwards, so that, you know, tensions could be settled and we didn't need to go back to the personal issues and so forth, but really to understand what actually happened. And I think it's an approach that deserves, especially, you know, I've seen it perhaps now with insight, looking back at a number of things, used in Anglo-Saxon historiography, which I personally tend to read quite a bit, where you see how important talking with the people was and so forth. Not necessarily so much in Europe, but certainly that's something which I consider fundamental in your work. And it's been a real pleasure for me to share some of the, you know, personal experience, personal anecdotes, personal points of view, because of course, you know, other people will give you a complementary view, and A, nobody's memory is perfect, and B, nobody's reconstruction is 100% impartial. I think, you know, we're all human beings and we all have had our point of view. There are lots of politics behind the scenes. You were mentioning frequently our French colleagues and their privileged relations with the Soviet Union. I use it to tease them by telling them that France is the last Soviet republic, because there has always been, in particular in space science, this very, very strong link, which dates back actually to de Gaulle. You may know that de Gaulle has been the first Westerner to ever see a rocket launch from Baikonur, where Baikonur didn't even exist on a map. So, you know, that's clearly a very, very long-standing relationship that has been extending, you know, in the domain of science for a number of years. So you were also mentioning how challenging it was for ESA to enter in cooperation with Russia or Soviet Union on the, well, I still say the photon capsules, the biome capsules. you must understand that for ESA to enter international cooperation, you need the unanimity of the member states. Exactly because it commits everybody. So if there is one single member state, there had tensions with the Soviet Union for whatever other reasons, they would use it to say, okay, we're not going to do this. And it was just because of tensions in other domains, you know. Say, I don't know, a Soviet submarine caught in a Swedish harbor, and then the Swedes would say, well, we'll vote against this. And given that you need unanimity, it's, and this is again something you're not going to find in the documents, in the official histories, because of course, the Swedish delegate would simply say some formal statement which was approved by his their government, and not to really tell you the reason. And then in the corridor with a cup of coffee, they would say, look, you know, our government wants to make a point for a couple of months, and then everything will be fine, but it's a bit early to do that. So again, oral history seems to me, and again, I've learned this by interacting with you, which has been a pleasure and a privilege. Oral history really is a very, very important complement to what you find in the archives. And I would say in space science in particular, because many scientists are horrible writers. And so some of the papers you'll find, you'll have a really hard time making much sense out of it. You know, I've spent a significant fraction of my career in space diplomacy in rewriting documents that made absolutely, you know, were written in a language which, yeah, maybe was meant to be English, but it was some sort of Eurospeak where you really had to dig out what it was meant. So I really pity the poor archival researcher that in 50 years will try and make sense of some of the stuff, and it won't be particularly easy. So it's really, well, thank you for having invited me, and thank you for having, you know, for me, this has been a serious learning experience, and one which I really hope will be able to extend in the future, because I think I learned more from you than you may have learned from me. So really, thank you.
Thanks so much. We will start this week by quoting Erich International School on Science and Diplomacy, and in 2026 we will have 2 workshops. And sure, we want to speak about space diplomacy, and I think this very nice exercise is useful also to convince personalities like you to give in the future your private notes to European Union archives, because this is very, very important, archives. And okay, I disagree with the docking of 1975, that this was one of the most beautiful examples of space diplomacy. For me, it's Halley Comet, but it's typical, no? This is the American story, and but Comet Halley is not a US success. Also, if US participate, this is a European. But anyway, this is only an anecdote. Do you have some remarks, any question, any comments? Because I appreciate also your, in this exercise, yes, that you remember how is useful also for you, no, this exchange, and that you must maintain a distance between your personal experience, your personal analysis, interpretation, and during your interview to be very careful to underline this point, because sometimes we have some witness, they wanted to tell us the real story. Only another little remarks, but in Europe we have also the experience about oral history. In the European Union archives, you have a very nice, we decide to cooperate with them, and the director is Dieter Schlenker, because they have also a great experience on oral history, the interviews for the 3 volumes of the history of European Commission. But it's a real very expensive work, no? For instance, your interviews will be stocked in our agreement in the archives, but without the transcription. And also the decision to spend money, no? Research is money. Okay, I understand that when you speak about space mission, you speak about billions of dollars, but for us, sometimes only 100 euro is relevant. But to decide to spend for 3 days, Olga Dubrovina, and interview you directly, it is very different than an interview by Zoom or online. It's very, very different. And this is a strategic choice because this operation has a price also. But anyway, we want to continue this exercise. Do you have a comments from space? Carlo Bascigalupi.
Concerning your mention of the attitude of the Russian colleague that was having two different attitudes in two different interviews. So what happened in the middle? And my curiosity was so somebody decided on top of them that it was good to collaborate with European agencies. Okay, so that happened because of some obscure decision by somebody, or there was a communication between the layer of this colleague and the main government.
No, I think that the first time Eline didn't tell me the truth. Okay, he how to say, he told me the very official version of the collaboration. Then the concept of trust was born between me and him. That's why when I said that when you interview once, it's not so well for the researcher, because during different interview that you succeed in establishing the trust and the contact with people. Even if I told you it wasn't 23, I called him from Europe, from Italy. Even if I speak Russian and I'm Russian, still I'm not in Russia. And there wasn't trust from the beginning between me and him. And for the second time, I insisted on the second interview, and he already knew who I was. And then I interviewed other people from the institute. So he was more relaxed, and he said what he said after. So I think the truth was that it was the era of détente. It was the end of détente. And from the Soviet Union side, there was a very strong interest in scientific collaboration between with Europeans and even Americans. Okay, so Soviets wanted to, and they insisted on this collaboration. So from the documents I saw, and I can confirm Eline's words, that there were Soviets that really insisted on collaboration. Europeans didn't want to proceed so fast that Soviet wanted. So it was the decision took from above, obviously, and scientists, they just were told to insist on collaboration. And director of the institute, Eline, wasn't the director was Gazianka. And Soviet side, I don't know how many letters were sent in Europe, in ESA, in order to invite them. Please come to us. We will show you our conferences. We will show what we can show, because obviously they didn't show everything. And yes, there is a decision of political authority in order to insist on the collaboration with Europeans. Thank you.
If I can add something, the concept of trust is fundamental. I mean, and I would like to underline what you've said, David, about the importance of meeting people in person. To be blunt, you know, if we had done our interviews on Zoom, Olga may have told you 1/3 of what I said, because you don't know, you know, you can't bond on a video link, and sitting together, I don't know, I think a trust relationship developed very quickly, and so you can feel whether you can trust the person in front of you and be more open. Concerning instructions from the top, this is not unusual. You know, I remember many times some minister would travel to another country and make an offhand remark, oh, we should do something together. And then you see all the minions below rushing around like rats and trying to find something. And of course, the more authoritarian the system is, the more the minions think they have to please the boss. And so many times we've been called and said, oh, look, you know, we really should be doing something. I say, okay, what? Well, we don't know. Try and find something. Now, this is not unusual, believe me. It's much more usual than you think. And some good projects have been born in this way. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a fact of life. The president of country A travels to country B, and they bond with the president of country B. And so, you know, during an official meeting, and science is the easy bit because, again, in terms of security risk, it's minimal space science. Honestly, you know, sharing information about stars and outer planets carries minimal security risk. So it's the ideal area in which two countries that you know, may be former best enemies that are trying to get closer to each other, may start to exchange information, personnel, and etc. So it's absolutely not unusual that those things happen. I've seen it, you know, I've experienced it a number of times.
Thank you very much, Alessio Rocci, Brussels University. Just a methodological question about the oral history. And I was wondering if you had some limits that you decided to have, or when you have to do this interview, also with this interview, did you decide what to ask, what not to ask, or there were some problems? I mean, with the Russians maybe, or so some sensitive information involved. Thank you.
I reply my side. Of course, it's very difficult now, and what helps me is that I'm talking about 80s. I'm talking about something that happened 40 years ago, and every time when I introduce myself, I just say that I'm historian. I don't understand anything in technology, but even if you cannot believe me, but it's true. And I'm working on 80s. 80s is perestroika period, so it's and then it's a history, yes, an ancient history. And then another. Obviously I start asking questions, and I have my plan what I want to ask. But then I follow the person who talks, because I can discover a lot of things that I didn't foresee, for example, before I start my interview. So I don't follow the plan. I just follow this person. And normally I would say 80% of the interviews, I don't like calling them interviews. I like calling them meetings, encounters, even if it's on Zoom, because it's less formal meeting or interview. In 80%, it were people willing to speak with me, because they wanted to tell their stories. And for example, Eileen, and then I had some Europeans who even thanked me, because they said, you know, you're writing our history. It's our history, because if you don't do it, nobody will know about what we did and how we worked together. And for them, it's a very important piece of their lives. And of course, they even think about important piece of international history, because for them, and it was one of the first contacts that I established with Europeans. It was a European scientist. He said, I was perfectly aware that we were doing diplomacy, that we were diplomats. In the late 80s, we were building relations between two countries, and we were responsible of our role and our importance in building this relationship. And I'm speaking about 80s. And then another case, David Southwood, he's very high ranked. He's
he was the director of science in ISA.
Yes,
the director of science in ISA.
And he told me, I think I write in my book, that his mission was to go to Soviet Union. He started going in Soviet Union in the 60s. And he said that my mission was, he was very anti-communist, to explain to his Soviet counterparts that communism doesn't work. He personally wanted to show them how it works, how it was working in West, how they were happy to have capitalism, and how they are successful in doing their work and do their science, and how Soviets are unhappy and sad doing what they do because of the regime, political regime. So his mission was to explain to Soviets that their way of life is wrong. and he was very sincere with me. That's why I decided to go to Soviet Union. Thank you for your question.
And from my side, I mean, it's an interesting question, but I never thought about the issue because, I'm not having engaged, at least to the best of my knowledge, in any unlawful behavior during my career. There is nothing to hide, and I think it's in the best interest of everybody to make sure that, if there is anything interesting, this can be used in a fruitful way. I mean, I'm sure lots of the stuff, it's not necessarily interesting, but what you find interesting, I see no reason to have any, shield it from anything. It's what it is.
Yes, we must make a distinction between the interviews for the archives, no? You have a paper with a signature, you must decide to open, to not open in 30 years, or when you will be dead. This is we want this interview in a real general way, but this personal approach is very important. In a second step, we may use some question, perhaps. She made some other interviews only for her book, no? And in this way, she has another methodology. In my experience, but this is always the problem, it depends if you have in front of you let me say, a curious scientist, creative, curious, or some scientists who want to write the history, the real history of, I don't know, yesterday we had ENFN, CNR, INAF. Frankly speaking, this is this is no correct, no, from an historical point of view. Also, if you have, when I talk with the witness, the first reaction, but I must to stay, keep calm, is to say, no, it's not true. No, I have, because I am historian, I have the real image. No, this is a strong approach. We must to have, as with Carlo Bacigalupi, I hope we will see tomorrow, a sort of free exchange, no? But of curiosity. I have no to convince Carlo, and also Carlo has no problem to convince me. We have a free exchange. This is very, very important. The problem in history, in science diplomacy history, we may speak about this, history of science diplomacy, is if you have some historian of science who are very closed in their room, no? I speak too much freely, perhaps, but it's the same for us, no? When we have historian of diplomacy and they stay inside, no? Diplomatic papers, or diplomats, is not the situation in Italy, no? In general, also in France. We have several historians of international relations with different actors, different fields, but sometimes may arrive that we have some historians who are, frankly speaking, prisoner of their library sometimes. And the problem is also if you have a scientist prisoner of their laboratory. But this is a human. It is typical, no? But anyway, we have a public engagement by Mr. Fabio Fabata to give us his paper for the archive. Also this, no, I have explained two times for two very important people that they will give archives. And they said, okay, you may see Okay, I may see, but for me, the most relevant point is that you give the papers to archives. It's not my first mission, frankly speaking. Also, I am a historian, but to see this is archives. In this is operation, the most relevant target for me, also in the last year, is to bring in the archives papers, not to see, to study, to use. Okay, if it's possible, but the most relevant mission is to defend tools for memory. Because when you destroy archives, you have no memory. And this is also against the law when you destroyed public archives, but also the private archives. This is, and sometimes very important people have no idea how it will be important that they will give in a very special archives their papers. I repeat, it's not an advertising, but the European Union archives, historical archives, have a very nice experience. They are also open. The only archives on space open at global level is European Space Agency archive. But you may say, okay, but
I say bye-bye. No, thank you very much for your intention and for this opportunity to speak about my research that I really was very important. And I was very curious, as I said to Dr. Favata, I discovered the world in this space world of scientists. And for example, when I was in Madrid 2 days ago, and it's so strange to be inside this world, to speak with these people. You discover that they're very different from us. I mean, from historians, from people of social sciences, they think differently, and they appreciate, I want to say, that they appreciated my work because they say, you as historian, not you, Olga Dobrojna, you as historian, you have another approach to what we did, what they do. Can I speak sincerely? What they do, scientists? They just speak about facts because there are historians between scientists. So they just facts, we did this, we did that, etc., etc. Then this project became another project. It's boring. It's not history.
It is.
Yes, it's not history. So I think that our contribution from historians, pure historians, is important, even if sometimes we don't understand what they're speaking about. So I think that this collaboration is fundamental. So because when I, for example, the truth that I wrote my papers, I wrote my chapters, I send them to scientists. I just ask them to check if everything from technical point of view, if everything okay, because obviously I couldn't avoid any technical, all the technical issues. I wrote about technical issues, and I asked them to check. I think we can collaborate in this way, and even I repeat, they appreciate what we do, historians, and for us, obviously, collaborate with them is fundamental. Thank you very much. I have to wrap.
she leave for space and okay. I must say also that she made a very nice intervention in COSPAR. The last COSPAR each 2 years was in Bhutan. Also, this was a relevant investment, no? But thanks to this participation, she got several interviews, several contact, and in 2026, COSPAR will be in Florence again after April 1961. No, and they may be a very interesting anniversary to try to organize something. We must to finish, I think, but I will give you the last word.
Thank you very much. I'm really fascinated. For me, it's been a bit of a discovery to really to work together with you guys, because it's while I'm personally fascinated by history, I honestly, before meeting you both, I didn't even think this would be of interest to many people, what we have done in the past. And this the kind of work we did that would be of interest to professional historians. So for me, it's been a real discovery, and it has made me reflect a lot on the implications outside of our narrow field and how this can be used as an example. For example, the issue of diplomacy, the tools that we use, the approach that we use, how this can extend to broader diplomacy. And frankly, I'm really, really grateful and happy to have been invited here. And I look forward to the possibility of further collaboration because, again, for me, it's been a discovery of a new area of interest that I found fascinating. So thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll see tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock here or by streaming. Thanks. Bye.